adopted by Apache, hunted by past one of the most emotional Western movies. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Ethan Carter woke to the smell of smoke. At first, he thought it was just the morning mist burning off the fields, but then he heard it. The crack of wood breaking, the distant screams, the hurried shouts of his parents calling for him. His heart froze. Something was terribly wrong. He ran outside the small wooden cabin his family called home, and the sight that met him burned itself into his memory forever. Flames danced across the homestead, licking the edges of the fence, the barn, and the tiny house where he had spent his entire life. Shadows of men on horseback moved through the smoke, masked by the rising fire. Fear clutched him like iron chains, and before he could make sense of anything, a hand grabbed him roughly from behind. He twisted free, but the next second he was thrown to the ground as gunshots echoed across the valley. Breath. Ethan tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the chaos. He saw his father stumble, then fall. His mother called out, her voice cracking in terror, reaching for him one last time before she disappeared behind a wall of smoke and shouting.
Ethan's legs carried him instinctively, running as fast as his small body could through the tall grass that whipped against his face.
Great. Tears mixed with soot on his cheeks, and his tiny hands clawed at the ground, searching for any path that would take him away from the fire, from the men who had destroyed everything he knew. He didn't understand why they were there, why anyone would want to hurt him or his family. Bad. All he knew was that the world he had trusted and loved was gone in an instant. He ran until the heat of the fire was behind him, until the screams faded into the distance, but the image of his parents' faces never left him. Night fell quickly in the wilderness, and the cold bit through his thin shirt. Ethan huddled under a fallen log, shivering and alone. Hunger gnawed at his belly, but fear was stronger than the pain. He remembered the old stories his father told him, about the forest, about surviving when no one was there to help. Whereas, clinging to those memories, he forced himself to move again, stepping lightly over roots and rocks as if he were invisible, as if moving quietly could somehow erase what had happened. But he could not escape the memories. They followed him like shadows that would not let go. Days passed, though Ethan had no way of keeping track. He lived on berries he found in the bushes and water from the creek that wound through the valley. His legs ached and blisters formed on his feet, but still, he pressed forward. Sometimes he imagined his parents were just behind a hill, waiting for him to catch up, and he would call out their names. But the silence that answered him was cruel and empty. Nightmares came with the dark, bringing the faces of the men on horseback, the fire consuming everything he had loved. Ethan's small hands would shake as he buried himself under branches, trying to hide not just from the world, but from the memories that would not let him rest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Ethan stumbled upon a small cave hidden behind a veil of vines. The entrance was dark and unwelcoming, but it offered shelter from the cold and the danger outside. He crawled inside, his knees scraped and bleeding, and curled up as best he could on the hard stone. He pressed his face into his arms, trying to stop the shaking, and whispered to himself that he had to survive. Somehow, some way, he had to keep going. The fire in the distance had claimed his family, his home, and all he had known. But he would not let it take him too, promised himself that, even if no one else remembered him, he would not give up. Not yet. The following days were a blur of walking, hiding, and searching for food. Ethan discovered that he had to be clever to survive. He learned to follow the tracks of animals, to pick berries that would not make him sick, and to drink from the creek without falling ill. But the forest was not forgiving. One morning he woke to find his thin blanket of leaves soaked with rain. The storm raged above him, wind tearing at the trees, lightning splitting the sky, and rain turning the ground to mud. He tried to hold on to his small shelter in the cave, but the water seeped in, chilling him to the bone. He shivered uncontrollably, whispering the names of his parents over and over, wishing they were there to keep him safe. He fell asleep soaked and exhausted, dreaming of a world where the fire never came, where laughter still echoed through the homestead, where his parents' arms held him tight. It was during one of these cold, lonely nights that Ethan first saw them. Through the darkness, figures moved silently across the ridge above the valley. At first, he thought it was more men coming to harm him, more shadows to destroy what little hope remained. He pressed himself against the rock, heart pounding, barely daring to breathe. But then he noticed the difference. These figures did not carry weapons, did not shout or light fires to burn. They moved with care, stepping lightly as if they belonged to the land itself. Their eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to see him even before he saw them. Fear gripped him, but so did curiosity. He had never seen people like this, and he wondered if they were friend or foe. But as he watched, one of them, the one who seemed to be the elder, paused and looked directly at him, holding his gaze for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he raised his hand in a gesture that seemed to say, "Come if you dare, but no harm will come to you." Ethan hesitated, torn between the fear of the unknown and the desperate need for safety. Hunger, cold, and loneliness had worn him thin, and his small body ached for warmth and care. He took a trembling step forward, then another, until he was standing at the edge of the clearing, facing these strange people whose skin was sun-darkened, whose movements were as natural as the wind through the trees. The elder smiled gently, a smile that seemed to carry understanding, compassion, and an unspoken promise of protection. Ethan wanted to run, but he also wanted to believe. For the first time since that night of fire and death, a flicker of hope stirred in his heart. The elder knelt, lowering himself to Ethan's level. "Little one," he said softly, his voice calm and deep, "you are not alone." Ethan did not understand the words fully, but the meaning was clear. There was safety here. Grasp. He could stay, he could rest, he could be cared for. Tears streamed down his face, and he fell to his knees, exhausted and overwhelmed by emotions he could barely name. The elder reached out, and after a moment of hesitation, Ethan allowed himself to be taken by the hand. It was the first touch of kindness he had felt in days, the first gesture that promised he could survive, that the world might not be entirely cruel. As the night fell over the valley, Ethan followed the elder and the others into their camp. Fires burned warmly, smoke curling into the star-filled sky. Brett. Other children, other families, even some who looked like Ethan had been shaped by the wilderness, came forward and welcomed him with cautious smiles. For the first time, Ethan felt the stirrings of something he had not dared to feel in years. Belonging. He curled up near the fire, feeling its warmth on his chilled bones, and let himself drift into a sleep free from nightmares, at least for a few hours. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time since the fire, he felt a small spark of hope, and with it, a fragile courage to keep moving forward.
Ethan woke to the warmth of the morning sun and the gentle murmur of voices he did not understand.
The night had passed peacefully for the first time in what felt like forever, and the flickering embers of the fire had kept the chill of the wilderness at bay. He sat up slowly, feeling the aches in his small body, the lingering tension of constant fear, and a curiosity that prickled at him. Around him, the Apache camp was stirring. Men and women moved with purpose, tending to horses, repairing blankets, and preparing food over the fire. Children ran between the tents, laughing and calling out to one another. Their voices a music Ethan had not realized he missed. Everything seemed alive, vibrant, and at peace, in contrast to the chaos he had escaped. He had no words for it yet, but deep inside he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Safety. The elder who had found him, Running Hawk, approached with a soft smile. His eyes were sharp, yet kind, and they seemed to look right into Ethan's soul, seeing the pain, the fear, and the courage that lay beneath. "Little Falcon," he said, using the name he had given the boy, "today you will learn more of our ways. Do not be afraid. You are one of us now." Ethan flinched at the sound of the words. He had never been called one of us before, never felt part of anything beyond the shadows of loss. But there was a gentleness in Running Hawk's tone that eased the tension in Ethan's chest. Over the next days, Ethan began to learn the rhythm of life with the Apache. It was different from anything he had known. There was a quiet respect for the land, for the animals, and for each other. Hunting was not simply about survival. It was about honor, patience, and understanding. Running Hawk taught him how to move silently through the forest, to feel the earth beneath his feet, to read the tracks of deer, rabbits, and even birds. Ethan stumbled often, falling into bushes, scraping his knees, and missing footprints, but the elder never scolded him. Instead, he guided Ethan's hands, corrected his stance, and offered quiet encouragement. "The land speaks to those who listen," Running Hawk would say. And slowly, Ethan began to hear the whispers of the trees, the rustle of the leaves, the tracks of life hidden in the dirt and mud. Food became more than just survival, it became connection. The tribe shared what they had with him without hesitation. Elder women showed him which berries were safe to eat, how to boil water from the river so it would not make him sick, and how to store food for the nights when the cold would bite. The children, initially cautious of this small, pale boy, began to approach him with curiosity. They taught him games, showed him how to climb the rocks near the river, and invited him to join them in laughter and play. For the first time since the fire, Ethan laughed too, his voice mingling with the wind, the water, and the voices of the tribe. It was a strange, wonderful feeling. To belong, to be seen not as someone broken or lost, but as a part of something alive and strong. Narration. One day, Running Hawk took Ethan aside and led him deep into the forest, to a place where sunlight streamed through the trees in golden beams, illuminating the earth. "Today," Running Hawk said, "you will learn about the spirit of the hunt." Ethan watched as the elder crouched low, following the tracks of a deer. He showed Ethan how to move without disturbing the forest, how to notice the smallest signs, a broken twig, a footprint pressed into the soft earth, the bend of grass against the wind. Ethan tried to imitate him, stiff and clumsy at first, but he gradually began to move more naturally, his senses sharpening, his body learning the rhythm of the forest. And when the deer appeared, glancing cautiously before bounding away, Ethan felt a surge of excitement. It was not just the thrill of the chase. It was understanding, respect, and a connection to something greater than himself. As days turned into weeks, Ethan became stronger, faster, and wiser. He learned the language of the tribe, the songs of the wind and the water, and the stories of the ancestors who had walked the land long before anyone could remember. Around the fire at night, the elders told tales of courage, loss, and hope, and Ethan listened, imagining himself in those stories, feeling both the sorrow and the triumph. The tribe did not ask him to forget his past, but they taught him that the land could be a place of healing, that pain could be transformed into strength. Slowly the boy who had been haunted by fire, screams, and loss began to find peace in the rhythm of the Apache way. Ethan also learned the meaning of family beyond blood. He watched how the tribe cared for one another, how no one was left behind, and how the bond between them was forged not through shared ancestry but through shared life and loyalty. But children protected each other, hunters shared their catch, and elders guided without forcing. For Ethan, this was a revelation, but he had lost his family. But he was discovering that family could be found, nurtured, and chosen.
His heart, once heavy with grief, began to swell with gratitude and love.
Yet, despite the safety and warmth of the tribe, Ethan's past remained a shadow at the edges of his mind. In quiet moments when he was alone by the river or sitting atop a hill watching the sunset, he remembered the fire, the men on horseback, the cries of his parents. Tears would come unbidden, and he would whisper their names into the wind, as if calling them back from some distant place. Running Hawk noticed these moments, his eyes always gentle, and he never pressed Ethan to speak. Instead, he would simply sit beside the boy, placing a steady hand on his shoulder, a silent reassurance that he was not alone. "Pain is a part of you," the elders said one evening, "but it does not define who you are. You carry it, and you grow stronger because of it." Ethan tried to believe it, clinging to the wisdom of the man who had saved him. One afternoon, a group of Apache warriors returned from a hunt, bringing with them a young stag. The children, including Ethan, helped carry the animal to the camp, laughing and joking along the way. The air was filled with the smell of earth, fire, and smoke, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the simplicity of happiness, of work, of accomplishment, of being part of something bigger than himself. He realized that he had learned more than survival. He had learned trust, respect, and love. He had found a home not built of wood or stone, but of care, shared effort, and shared hearts. As the weeks passed into months, Ethan's small frame grew into a strong, agile boy. He ran with the other children, learned to shoot arrows with precision, and tracked animals through the forest like a shadow moving through the sunlight. The tribe had given him not just safety, but a purpose. He began to take pride in his skills, his resilience, and his place among them. The name Little Falcon became more than a title. It became who he was, a symbol of survival, courage, and freedom. Despite all this, Ethan never forgot the fire, the screams, or the faces of his lost family. But the Apache taught him that the world was not only cruel, it was also full of beauty, connection, and love. They showed him that the past could guide the present without destroying it, that the lessons of loss could shape strength, and that belonging could be found even in the wildest, most unforgiving places. Slowly, the boy who had been alone and terrified became a young boy who knew the meaning of courage, loyalty, and hope. By the end of the first year with the tribe, Ethan could hunt and track almost as well as the elders, climb the cliffs and trees with ease, and move through the forest without leaving a trace. He could speak their language fluently, sing their songs, and tell their stories around the fire, but more importantly, he had learned to trust and to love again. The fear that had once ruled his life had softened, replaced by a quiet confidence that he belonged somewhere, that he was valued, and that he could face whatever challenges the world might throw at him. Ethan lay one evening on the grassy hill outside the camp, watching the stars begin to pierce the darkening sky. He felt the wind on his face, smelled the smoke from the fire below, and heard the soft murmur of the river in the distance. But for the first time, he allowed himself to feel hope. Not just for tomorrow, but for the years ahead. The boy who had once run alone through the wilderness, haunted by the screams of his past, had found a family, a home, and a life worth living. He was Little Falcon. And though the shadows of yesterday lingered, he had learned that he could carry them without being broken. The forest was alive around him, the tribe sleeping peacefully in the warmth of their fires. And Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the land, the heartbeat of his new family, and the quiet courage that had taken root in his own heart. He knew that life would not always be easy, that challenges would come, but for the first time, he believed he could face them, not as a lost boy, but as a child of the Apache, strong, brave, and free. The years passed like the slow flow of the river, and Ethan, now a young man, had grown strong, agile, and wise beyond his years. The wilderness had shaped him as much as the Apache had, teaching him patience, observation, and courage. He could move silently through the forest, climb cliffs with ease, track deer and elk without leaving a trace, and shoot arrows with a precision that astonished even the elders. The tribe had become his family in every sense. Running Hawk a mentor and guide, the women gentle teachers of care and wisdom, and the children his companions and friends. Ethan's heart, once heavy with loss, had learned to trust, to laugh, and even to hope again. But deep beneath this calm the shadows of his past remained, silent but persistent, waiting like a storm behind the mountains. One late afternoon, while Ethan patrolled the edge of the forest, he noticed something unusual. The tracks in the dirt seemed out of place, deliberate, heavy, and unfamiliar. At first he thought it might be a wandering hunter or trader, but there was something in the way the horses had moved that made him uneasy. He followed the tracks cautiously, moving low and silent, remembering the lessons of Running Hawk. The tracks led him along the river, through tall grass, and finally to a ridge overlooking the valley. There, he saw them. Strangers on horseback. Men he did not recognize, but whose presence made the blood in his veins run cold. Ethan did not approach. He hid behind a boulder, watching as the men scouted the area, their voices harsh and their eyes sharp. They spoke of a boy, a survivor of a homestead attack, a pale boy with no family, and they laughed cruelly at the thought of capturing him. Ethan's stomach twisted. Bray, could it be? They were hunting him. The realization struck him like an arrow. For years he had believed the world had forgotten him, that his life with the Apache was safe and complete. But now the past had returned, relentless and unforgiving, threatening to tear apart everything he had built. Rushing back to the camp, Ethan tried to warn Running Hawk and the elders. His voice trembled as he explained what he had seen, pointing to the ridge and describing the men. The elders exchanged glances, concern flickering in their eyes. "They are hunters," Running Hawk said quietly, "but they do not know the ways of this land." Brain. "Still they are dangerous. We must prepare, little falcon." Bray. Ethan's heart pounded, a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. He had survived the wilderness before, but this was different. This time, the danger was personal, rooted in a past that he had tried to leave behind.
Over the next days, the tribe moved with quiet urgency.
Ethan trained harder than ever, learning not just the skills of hunting, but of evasion, strategy, and defense.
The warriors taught him how to anticipate attacks, set traps, and move silently through the night.
Every night he sat by the fire, listening to the wind, imagining the footsteps of those who hunted him, and wondering how he would protect the tribe that had given him life again. His thoughts often returned to the homestead, to the fire, to his parents, and to the men who had destroyed everything he loved. Rage and grief simmered beneath his calm exterior, fueling his desire not only to survive but to confront the ghosts that haunted him. Then, one evening, a scout returned with troubling news. The hunters had been seen near the edge of the forest, closer than before, their horses tired but relentless. They were searching for the boy who had survived the homestead attack, and now they had narrowed their path to the valley. Grasp. Ethan felt a chill creep down his spine. The world he had built, the safety he had known, was under threat. Broken Hawk placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Fear is natural," the elder said, "but courage is our choice. Remember what you have learned. Remember who you are." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his young shoulders. He was no longer just a boy. He was a protector, a member of this family, and he would not allow them to be harmed. The first encounter came unexpectedly. Ethan was near the river collecting water when he heard the distant sound of hooves and the snap of branches. He froze, crouching low, and watched as a group of men moved along the edge of the forest. They were searching, calling out, their voices rough and threatening. Ethan's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He remembered every lesson Running Hawk had taught him. The patience, the silence, the movement of the earth beneath his feet. Slowly, carefully, he moved through the trees, keeping to the shadows, watching, learning their pattern. The next days were a tense game of cat and mouse. Ethan tracked the hunters, marking their routes and learning their habits, all while keeping the tribe safe. He taught himself to think like them, to anticipate their moves, and to prepare the land for defense. Breath. Traps were set along the paths, arrows hidden, and signals prepared to alert the camp. Ethan had never felt more alive, but he had also never felt the weight of fear so heavily. Each night, as the camp slept, he kept watch from the hills, listening to the wind, feeling the pulse of the forest, and waiting.
One morning, the hunters made their mistake.
They had grown careless, moving too quickly, too loudly, unaware that the forest itself seemed to conspire against them. Ethan led them on a chase through the thick woods, weaving between trees, over rocks, and through hidden trails known only to him and the Apache. When they stumbled into a trap, a pit covered with branches and leaves, they finally realized that the boy they sought was no ordinary child. He was clever, resourceful, and fearless, forged by fire, wilderness, and the love of a tribe that had become his family. Breath. Yet victory was bittersweet. The encounter reminded Ethan that his past would never fully release him, that danger could return at any moment. He thought of his parents, of the homestead, and of the life that had been stolen from him. Rage simmered in his chest, but he also felt a strange sense of peace. He had survived. He had protected the people he loved. And he had proven to himself that he was no longer the frightened boy running alone through the wilderness. He was Little Falcon, strong, skilled, and brave. As the hunters retreated, nursing their wounds and their pride, Ethan returned to the camp. The tribe welcomed him with quiet pride, not needing to speak the words. They understood. He sat by the fire, watching the flames dance, feeling the warmth on his skin and the bond of family in the shared silence around him. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the satisfaction of mastery, the knowledge that he had faced a threat far greater than he had ever imagined and emerged victorious. But even in the quiet moments, the memories of fire and loss returned. Ethan would sometimes wake in the night, drenched in sweat, hearing echoes of screams and the crackle of flames. The hunters were gone, but they had left their mark, a reminder that the world outside the forest could be cruel, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Running Hawk noticed these moments, always offering the same quiet reassurance. "The past is part of you, Little Falcon," he said one evening. "It shapes you, but it does not control you. Remember that we are your strength. Now." "Let the land and your family guide you." Burst. Ethan held onto those words like a lifeline, learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Over the following weeks, Ethan took on new responsibilities within the tribe. He became a scout, a protector, and a guide, leading groups through the forest and ensuring the safety of children and elders. He learned to read the subtle signs of danger, the bent grass, the snapped twig, the distant rustle of leaves. Every sense was sharpened, every skill honed, and while the shadow of his past still lingered, it no longer paralyzed him. He could face it, understand it, and use it to guide his actions. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Ethan stood atop a cliff overlooking the forest. The wind whipped through his hair, carrying the scent of pine, river, and fire.
In that moment, he felt a mixture of triumph, sorrow, and determination.
Pace, the hunters had come. They had tried to take him, and yet he had survived. He had learned to fight, to protect, and to endure. He was no longer a boy haunted by loss. He was a young man shaped by it, strengthened by it, and guided by the tribe that had given him a second chance. But deep in his heart, he knew the journey was far from over. The world beyond the forest still held dangers, secrets, and challenges he could not yet foresee. The hunters were only the beginning, a reminder that his past could never be fully buried. And yet, for the first time, Ethan did not feel powerless. He had learned the ways of the land, the strength of family, and the courage that lived within him. He was ready for whatever came next. As the stars emerged, one by one, in the vast night sky, Ethan returned to the camp. The children laughed, the elders spoke in gentle tones, and the fire burned brightly. He joined them, sitting quietly at first, then sharing a story of his scouting adventure. The tribe listened, eyes wide with admiration and pride. Ethan smiled, feeling the warmth of belonging, the strength of unity, and the quiet power of resilience. For the first time, he truly understood what Running Hawk had meant when he said that pain could shape courage, and that family could be found in the most unexpected places.
The hunters were gone for now, but the lessons remained.
Ethan's past would always be a part of him, a shadow that reminded him of loss and survival. Yet the present was his to shape, guided by the wisdom of the Apache, the strength of the land, and the love of the family he had chosen. And in that knowledge he found not just safety but purpose, courage, and the beginning of a story that was still unfolding. The sun had barely risen when Ethan felt the tension in the air, thick and sharp as the wind through the tall grass. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, mapping the land, setting traps, and studying the movements of the men who had haunted his past. Every step he took now was deliberate, every sense alert. The forest around him was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the soft crackle of branches under the weight of deer. Yet none of it could drown out the echo of fear and anger that had been building in him for years. Today he would face the hunters. Today he would confront the men who had stolen his family, and for the first time he would discover the truth about that terrible night. Ethan moved like a shadow through the forest, silent and steady, remembering every lesson Running Hawk had taught him. He knew these men were ruthless, desperate, and cunning, but he also knew the land. Every tree, every hill, every hidden path was his ally. He paused at a ridge overlooking a narrow valley where he had seen their tracks. From this vantage point, he could watch without being seen. There they were, moving with careful caution, but unaware of the traps he had set. Pits hidden under brush, snares disguised by leaves, and arrows tipped and ready for those who ventured too close. Ethan's heart pounded, but his mind was calm. He was ready. As the hunters descended into the valley, Ethan began to shadow them, following silently, observing their habits, learning their weaknesses. He noticed one man in particular, tall and cruel-eyed, who seemed to lead the group. Ethan's stomach tightened as he realized this man was not just a hunter, he was connected to the fire that had destroyed his family. The memories of that night surged forward, the screams, the flames, the helplessness. But he forced himself to breathe, to focus, to remember the strength he had gained. He would not let rage cloud his mind. He would use it to guide his actions, as Running Hawk had taught him. By midday, Ethan decided to act. He moved swiftly and silently, setting small obstacles to slow the hunters, using the forest to his advantage. A fallen tree blocked their path, forcing them to dismount, while hidden pits caught the horses' hooves, sending the animals stumbling and neighing in panic. Each trap worked perfectly, slowing the men and confusing them, while Ethan remained hidden, watching, waiting, calculating. The hunters grew frustrated, shouting at one another, their patience fraying. Ethan felt a flicker of satisfaction, but reminded himself that this was only the beginning. The final confrontation would require more than clever traps. It would require courage, skill, and heart. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself in a narrow canyon where the hunters had unknowingly walked into a natural choke point. Rocks and trees formed a corridor, perfect for a controlled engagement. He signaled to a few of the Apache warriors who had joined him secretly, trained in his ways. Together they prepared, placing arrows and weapons in positions where the hunters could not see them. Ethan's pulse was steady, his mind clear. He felt a deep sense of connection to the tribe, to Running Hawk, and to every lesson that had brought him to this moment. He was not alone. He had a family who believed in him, and now he would protect them and honor his past. The hunters entered the canyon, unaware of the ambush. Ethan watched as the tall, cruel-eyed man laughed, confident and mocking, convinced that the boy he had once terrorized was now helpless. Ethan felt a surge of anger but tempered it with calm. When the first man stumbled into a snare, Ethan's arrow struck true, cutting off escape. Chaos erupted. The hunters fought back, but they were unprepared for the skill, strategy, and knowledge of the land that Ethan and the Apache brought to bear. But battle was intense but precise, every movement calculated. Ethan felt the adrenaline surge, but he kept his mind focused on the goal: to stop these men, uncover the truth, and survive. In the midst of the confrontation, Ethan came face to face with the tall man, the one who had led the attack on his family. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to pause. Ethan saw not just a hunter, but a man whose cruelty had shaped the boy he once was. "You think you can hide?" the man sneered. Beside. Ethan did not respond with words. He remembered the fear that had gripped him as a child, and the strength that had grown from it. With a precise movement, he disarmed the man, using both skill and strategy, and forced him to the ground. The moment was tense, charged with emotion, as years of pain, loss, and anger surged forward. "You destroyed my family," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Why?" The man's eyes flickered with fear, hesitation, and then a flicker of recognition. Breaking, slowly, in broken confessions, he revealed the truth. The attack had not been random. It had been orchestrated by someone close to Ethan's father, someone who sought land, wealth, and revenge. The betrayal had come from within their own circle, a secret that had remained hidden for years. Ethan listened, every word striking like a blow, yet he did not falter. The revelation was painful, but it also gave him clarity. The past could not be changed, but the present could be shaped. He had the power now. After the confrontation, Ethan bound the men carefully, ensuring they could not harm anyone again, and signaled the Apache warriors to secure the area. The tribe approached cautiously, their eyes wide, with a mixture of concern and admiration. Running Hawk placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a silent gesture of pride. Ethan looked at the hunters, the men who had caused him so much pain, and felt a mixture of triumph and compassion. They were human, flawed, and dangerous, but they had lost their power over him. He had grown beyond fear and anger, guided by wisdom, strength, and love. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and red, Ethan returned to the camp with the hunters secured. The tribe gathered around, listening as he recounted the confrontation, careful to honor both the victories and the lessons learned. Children looked up at him with wide eyes, elders nodded with approval, and Running Hawk's gaze held deep pride. Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had known. He had faced his enemies, uncovered the truth about his family, and protected the people he loved. The pain of the past had not vanished, but it no longer controlled him. In the days that followed, the tribe helped Ethan process the revelations about his family. He learned the full story. A trusted friend of his father's had betrayed them for personal gain, orchestrating the raid that had destroyed the homestead. The betrayal had left scars, but it also explained the randomness, the cruelty, and the loss. Ethan allowed himself to grieve fully, to cry for the parents he had lost and the childhood stolen from him. The Apache taught him that grief was natural, that it could be acknowledged and honored without consuming him. With their guidance, Ethan found a balance, remembering the past without being trapped by it, honoring his family while embracing the life he had now. The young man also reflected on his own growth. He realized that he had been shaped not only by tragedy but by the lessons of the Apache, their wisdom, compassion, and respect for life. He had learned to be patient, to trust, to fight, and to love. The skills he had honed in the forest were not just for survival, but for protection, for justice, and for the preservation of life. He had transformed from a frightened boy running from fire and death into a young man capable of facing danger with courage and clarity. One quiet night, Ethan sat by the fire with Running Hawk. The elder's eyes were calm and knowing. "You have faced the past," he said softly. "You have seen the truth. Now you must decide what comes next. Will you carry only anger, or will you carry wisdom and strength?" Ethan thought about the hunters, the betrayal, and the lessons of the forest. But justice, courage, and protection for those he loved could. He made a silent promise to himself and to the tribe. He would honor his family by living, by protecting, and by using his strength for good. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Ethan felt a quiet sense of resolution. He had confronted the ghosts of his past, faced the men who had tried to destroy him, and uncovered the truths that had haunted him for years. Yet he had also discovered something more profound: the strength of family, the power of love, and the courage that comes from facing fear with wisdom and heart. He was no longer only the boy who had run through the wilderness, haunted by fire and loss. He was a young man shaped by experience, guided by love, and ready to face whatever the world might bring. The forest around the camp was alive with the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of night birds, and the quiet murmur of the river. Ethan looked out over the land that had both tested and nurtured him, feeling a deep connection to every tree, every stone, every creature. He knew that challenges would come again, that the past would never fully release him, but he also knew he was no longer powerless. With the Apache by his side, with the wisdom he had gained, and with the courage he had cultivated, he was ready for the next chapter of his life. That night, as the fire crackled and the tribe slept peacefully, Ethan allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in years: peace. The past had left scars, the enemies had revealed secrets, and the pain of loss remained, but he had faced it all. He had survived. He had grown. He had protected the people he loved. And most importantly, he had discovered that the true strength of a person was not in running from fear or hiding from the past, but in facing it, learning from it, and using it to shape a future worth living. Ethan lay beneath the stars, the wind carrying the scent of pine, fire, and earth. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the land, the heartbeat of the tribe, and the quiet strength within himself. The battle was over, the secrets revealed, and the path forward clearer than ever. He was ready to embrace it, not as a boy hunted by shadows, but as a young man who had learned the meaning of courage, loyalty, and love. The morning light fell softly over the valley, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Ethan stood at the edge of the camp, feeling the cool breeze against his face. The events of the past weeks had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. He had faced the men who had destroyed his family, uncovered the painful truths that had haunted him for years, and protected the tribe that had given him life again. But now, with the danger behind him and the sun rising on a new day, he felt something he had not felt in years: a deep, quiet sense of peace. He walked through the camp, observing the familiar faces of the Apache. Children ran and laughed, chasing one another through the grassy fields, their joyful shouts echoing off the hills. Elders tended fires, repairing clothing and preparing meals, their movements calm and steady. Bows and arrows, their focus sharp, their skill precise. Everywhere he looked, Ethan saw life, strength, and community, the things he had thought he had lost forever. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to belong. Ethan approached Running Hawk, who was sitting beside the fire sharpening a knife. The elder looked up and smiled, his eyes reflecting both pride and understanding. "You have grown much, little falcon," he said quietly, breathfully. "Not just in strength or skill, but in heart. You have faced fear, sorrow, and betrayal, and yet you remain whole." "That is the mark of a true warrior," Ethan nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had learned to survive, to fight, and to protect. But he had also learned something deeper. Courage was not only in battle, but in forgiveness, in patience, and in choosing love over hate. Over the next days, Ethan helped the tribe restore what had been disrupted by the arrival of the hunters. Paths were repaired, traps were removed, and the animals that had been frightened by the chaos were guided back to safety. Ethan took pride in the work, knowing that each action was a step toward healing, for himself and for those he loved. He taught the younger boys and girls how to track and hunt, passing on the knowledge that Running Hawk had once shared with him. In doing so, he realized that strength was not just in defending oneself, but in nurturing others, in sharing skills and wisdom, and in ensuring that the next generation could thrive. One afternoon, while Ethan was helping to gather water from the river, he spotted a figure on a distant ridge.
At first, his heart skipped a beat.
Could it be another threat? But as the figure came closer, he realized it was a messenger from a nearby settlement. The man carried news of the region. The hunters had been captured and brought to justice. The lands around the valley were safe for travel, and no further attacks were expected.
Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him, mingled with gratitude.
The shadow of his past was finally lifting. He had faced it, understood it, and overcome it. The boy who had once run alone through the wilderness was no more. That evening, the tribe gathered around the largest fire in the camp. The flames danced in the twilight, casting long shadows over the circle of faces. Ethan took a deep breath and stood before them. "I have learned many things," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I have learned that the world can be cruel, but also beautiful. I have learned that family is not only blood, but love, loyalty, and trust. I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it, Braish. And I have learned that home is where the heart is." The tribe listened in silence, their eyes reflecting respect, admiration, and deep affection. Ethan felt a wave of emotion he had not expected, gratitude, relief, and belonging all at once. Breaths. That night, as the camp settled under a blanket of stars, Ethan wandered to the edge of the forest, overlooking the valley. The wind carried the scents of pine, river, and earth. He remembered the fire that had taken his parents, the screams that had haunted his dreams, and the loneliness that had once defined his existence. And yet, standing there now, he felt neither fear nor despair. He had survived, he had grown, and he had found a family who would always be there for him. The pain of the past remained, but it no longer controlled him. He had turned tragedy into strength, loss into wisdom, and fear into courage. In the days that followed, Ethan became a central figure in the tribe. He led hunting parties, guided travelers safely through the valley, and taught the children the skills and wisdom he had learned. Running Hawk continued to mentor him, but now Ethan also became a teacher, passing on knowledge and guidance to those who looked up to him. The boy who had once been alone in the wilderness had become a young man who inspired others, a symbol of resilience, hope, and courage. Ethan also found time for reflection and personal growth. He often sat alone by the river, skipping stones across the water, listening to the birds and feeling the rhythm of the land. In those quiet moments, he thought about his parents, the life he had lost, and the journey that had brought him to this place. He allowed himself to grieve, to remember, and to honor the past, knowing that it had shaped him, but would no longer define him. The Apache had taught him that healing was a process, that strength was not in denial, but in acceptance. And for the first time, Ethan truly felt whole. One afternoon, while walking through the forest with a group of children, Ethan noticed a young boy struggling to climb a rock face. He stopped, extended a hand, and helped the boy up, steadying him and encouraging him with kind words. As the boy reached the top, his face lit up with pride and joy. Ethan realized then that he was not only protecting the tribe, but shaping its future. The lessons he had learned, the courage he had cultivated, and the wisdom he had gained would live on in the children he guided. In this realization, he found profound purpose and satisfaction. Weeks later, as the seasons began to change, Ethan led the tribe on a ceremonial hunt, a rite of passage for those who had grown strong and learned the ways of the forest.
The hunt was not only a test of skill, but a celebration of life, courage, and unity.
Ethan moved with confidence and grace, tracking game, guiding the others, and ensuring that every step respected the balance of the land. By the end of the hunt, the tribe had secured enough food to sustain them, and spirits were high. Brown. Around the fire that evening, stories were told, songs were sung, and Ethan felt a deep connection to the land, to the people, and to the life he had been given. It was during this time that Ethan finally allowed himself to let go completely of the fear and anger that had once consumed him. He thought about the hunters, the men who had chased him, and the secrets of his past. Instead of bitterness, he felt understanding and clarity. He realized that holding on to hatred would only chain him to the past. By choosing compassion, wisdom, and courage, he could live freely, honor his parents, and protect the people who had saved him. The boy who had run through the wilderness in fear was now a young man who stood tall, guided by knowledge, love, and integrity. Breath. As the years passed, Ethan's legend grew within the tribe. He was known as a skilled tracker, a wise guide, and a courageous protector. He taught not only survival skills, but also the values of patience, respect, and compassion. Children admired him, elders respected him, and the land itself seemed to respond to his presence. Yet, despite the admiration and achievements, Ethan remained humble, remembering the lessons of running hawk. That strength is not in pride but in service. That courage is in action, not recognition, and that love and family are the true measures of a life well lived. One quiet evening, Ethan stood atop a hill overlooking the valley. The wind carried the scent of pine and smoke from the fires below. He felt the pulse of the land, the heartbeat of the tribe, and the quiet strength within himself. Memories of the past, the fire, the loss, the fear, still lingered, but they no longer had power over him. He had faced them, understood them, and transformed them into resilience, courage, and wisdom.
Ethan knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he was ready.
He had a home, a family, and a purpose. He had found peace. As the sun set, casting the valley in shades of amber and crimson, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had been a frightened boy, alone and hunted, haunted by loss and fear. Dusk, he had wandered the wilderness, clinging to life, until the Apache had found him. They had taught him, nurtured him, and given him a family. He had grown strong, skilled, and wise. He had faced the men who had destroyed his past, uncovered the truth about his family, and protected the people he loved. And now, he had found what he had longed for all his life: belonging, purpose, and peace. As night fell and stars blanketed the sky, Ethan returned to the camp. The fire burned brightly. Children laughed and played, and elders shared stories of courage and wisdom. Ethan joined them, feeling the warmth of love and community surrounding him. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel fully content, knowing that the past had shaped him, but the present and future were his to embrace. He was Little Falcon, no longer haunted, no longer lost, but a young man who had truly found home. And so, under the vast sky, with the land, the tribe, and the life he had fought to protect, Ethan Carter finally understood what it meant to be free. Free not from the past, but from the fear of it. free to live, to love, and to shape a future full of courage, wisdom, and belonging. The story was one of survival, of growth, of family, and of the quiet triumph of the human spirit. A life once broken, now whole, and stronger than ever.